This time, I want to pick up on the information we stopped with at the end of the prior video. We walked through all this law: vicarious liability, contributory infringement, the Sony VTR case, the Grokster intent standard. We saw a bunch of moving parts, and I left you maybe a little unsatisfied by saying, oh, it's a mess. But it is. And in this video, I want to take you from mess to where we are now. And so I'm calling it Beyond Sony/Grokster to show you what happens when the law is messy, and yet companies need to make decisions and move forward. And I want to show you three things that happened. I have them up on the slide. Let's do them one by one. The first thing I want to show you is that Congress was provoked to create what we call a safe harbor. Congress steps in while all this is so messy. They could have stepped in and written us clear law. That would have been great. Because remember, all the law I told you about in the last video was judge-made law. Common law courts made up vicarious and contributory. The Supreme Court made up the exception about merely capable of substantial non-infringing uses. We could have had Congress come in and say, thanks everybody, we're going to write up something clean that you shall all follow. And Congress did not do that. But Congress instead came in and made a safe harbor. They made a rule that said, if you meet the following conditions, you can't be sued. You're safe. If you don't meet these conditions, go litigate. Let's argue more about knowledge, control, and the like. But if you meet these conditions, you're safe. They made a safe harbor. And they had in mind a bunch of kinds of companies. The piece I want to show you is the piece that had these companies in mind: YouTube, Facebook, old school Twitter, eBay. And these are companies that deal with user-generated content. Their infringement, if they were accused, would be based in the fact that you and I give them stuff. We upload things to YouTube. We upload things to Facebook. We upload things to eBay. And these companies then are involved. Interestingly, in fact, they might be liable as third parties. They're helping me and you infringe. They might also be involved directly. When I give a video to YouTube, YouTube then makes copies of it, 1061. YouTube then distributes it, 1063. YouTube arguably then performs it by letting a lot of people watch it, 1064. There's also direct liability. Congress saw this. It saw these entities, the ones that get user-generated content, that makes them vulnerable. If you're the New York Times, maybe we say you're responsible for what you print because you hire the reporters, you have editors, you're in charge. These guys, there's so much volume and it's flooding in from their users. We might be sympathetic. They're going to cause harm and it might be hard for them to solve that problem. They might be sympathetic and they have lots of exposure. All the stuff from last video about third-party liability, plus some 1061 exposure, some 1062 exposure, 3, and so on. And so Congress came in and said, for you guys, we'll make a safe harbor. And it was called Section 512C. It's a lot of words. Let me point out just a couple things. First, it's a special safe harbor that applies in instances where you have a service provider who's at risk for infringement of copyright by reason of the storage at the direction of a user. That's my point about what these companies have in common. They're at risk for infringement because they store information that was provided by the user. And so Congress in 512C says those companies, I'm going to make a special rule for them. I understand why they might be getting in trouble. I understand why it's a unique problem, a hard problem. I'm going to make rules for them. And I'll point out to you there are other parts of 512 that hit other parts of the technology ecosystem. For example, there's a section of 512 about search engines. But 512C will give you a lot of the flavor, so I want to focus there. This is the one for UGC sites, user-generated content. The main thing Congress said was this bottom piece, that you get your safe harbor if, upon learning of a problem, you respond expeditiously to remove or disable access to the material that is claimed to be infringing. And Congress and commentators talk about this as notice and takedown. If you get a level of understanding, notice, if you get a bunch of information where you know, gosh, I'm YouTube and on my website there's this copyrighted material, it's the movie Mean Girls, that shouldn't be there. If you get notice, and 512, as it's been interpreted, requires you to have like hit you over the head notice. Not a hint, not an inkling, not a suspicion, not reasonable cause, but like, oh my God, that's clearly no good. But if you have powerful notice, you got to take it down. Notice and take down. In 512C, it's got a bunch of other moving parts in there, but it basically says if you set up your system such that when you get really detailed knowledge, you respond, you're then immune. You can't be sued for the situations where you didn't have that really detailed knowledge. You can't be sued for situations where there's nothing you could do. If you have a system of notice and takedown, and the notices largely come from the copyright owners, because it's hit you over the head knowledge, typically the way you get it is Paramount sends you a notice. There's a system, say on YouTube, we can click the button, and Paramount clicks the button and says, at this URL, there's a copyrighted property, it's mine, I swear, take it down. And 512C basically pressured Facebook and eBay and these entities to set up a system where content companies give notice, and if content companies gave notice, the tech companies had to respond. That was 512C, and it was a safe harbor. At that point, you were immune. If your responses still left a lot of bad stuff up, that's okay. It was an immunity to get these companies to cooperate in notice and takedown. And I think Congress thought this was a good middle ground solution. I'll tell you, the content companies didn't love it because it's a teaspoon solution to an ocean problem. Which means, yeah, I can give you notice, but as I give you notice about this, 50 other things show up. Or there are 10,000 copies of a given work online. I'm going to go one by one by one by one. It doesn't really scale, in part because it puts the burden on the content company to be watching every video on YouTube and stepping in, to be scanning Facebook nonstop and calling it out. It doesn't really scale. But one thing that Congress did, because the law was so messy, Congress came in and created 512C, this safe harbor that created some pressure on the tech companies to participate in notice and takedown. One response. A second response, and one that's a little more exciting, is because of all the uncertainty. Uncertainty from the cases in the last video, and even some uncertainty about 512C. There was a bunch of litigation about what kind of notice triggers these requirements, what other things might cause you to get kicked out of the safe harbor. There was enough moving parts that everyone felt some uncertainty, and that led to deals. There were several deals. The one I want to show you is this one, the principles for user-generated content, and maybe the thing to show you is those logos on the left-hand side. If you look at those logos on the left-hand side, you see a bunch of entities you might recognize. And what happened is the General Counsel of Disney and the General Counsel of Microsoft got together in the face of all this uncertainty and started knocking on doors at other tech and content companies and talking to the general counsels and pointing out to them, we all need some rules. We all need some certainty, so tech companies, you guys can do your business, content companies, you guys can do yours. And so the general counsels at Disney and at Microsoft ended up pulling it together a wide array of content tech companies to agree on these UGC principles. And the principles, what they basically said is they said the content companies would create a database that would have their material, and the tech companies would promise at the moment of upload to compare the upload to the database. And if there was a match, do whatever they agreed. Some content companies said if there's a match, don't let the upload happen. Some content companies said if there's a match, you can allow it, but don't monetize. Some said if there's a match, you can monetize, but give me the money. They had different rules. The tech companies agreed they'd look at the database, look for matches, and then react to matches. And maybe you know about this. I experience this all the time. My kids play musical instruments. One of my kids plays piano, another plays saxophone, and we often upload them playing their instrument so that grandma and grandpa can listen to a YouTube video of the kid playing. And it makes me so happy that every once in a while, YouTube recognizes the song. And yeah, they block our video, but it's like, they know what my kid's playing on the piano. So exciting. These systems are up and running on all these tech platforms because of this deal. And it takes the place of the law. There was knowledge, control, vicarious, Sony-based liability, the VTR case. There was Section 512C. There was all this stuff. And the companies got together and said, let's write something we can do that's stable and let's everyone get back to work. The UGC principles, this deal. And do I love it? Mixed feelings. It does help solve the problem. Again, this is up and running. You might experience it as you upload content. I would have asked for a little bit more, I think. For instance, even without looking at the database, if YouTube sees that 20,000 people all upload the same video within a few minutes, they should realize that's infringing, even if they don't know what it is. That's not like a homemade video. More likely, that's all those folks just watched Saturday Night Live, thought, hey, that opening's funny, and uploaded it. I would have asked for things in addition to a database. Database does accomplish something, but I would have thought we'd do other simple rules where if it's clear it's infringing, they would step up. But that wasn't the deal. And the important thing I just want to say to you is there was a deal. Because of the legal uncertainty, everybody had skin in the game. We got deals. Last thing I want to point out, again, because third-party liability was such a mess, we saw some first-party liability come back to the fore. And the example I want to show you here is the music industry. While they were fighting all these cases, Napster, Grokster, getting a lot of pushback from the courts, and also on policy grounds. The technologies companies would say, stop messing with us. It's the college kid who's doing the wrong thing. Go deal with the college kid. Don't ruin the internet because of the college kid. Deal with the college kid. And so at a dramatic point, the music industry said fine. And this article was one of the big days. They'd filed 261 lawsuits against the college kids who were using services like Napster and Grokster. Direct liability. And interesting in a bunch of ways. One, it reminded me why I don't like direct liability and why I do like third-party liability. This felt really unfair. 261 kids got in trouble, but there were thousands of kids, tens of thousands of kids doing the exact same thing, and they didn't. By contrast, when you go after Napster and Grokster, it's a little more even-handed. You went after something in the middle that was involved in everybody. It's a business. They have lawyers. We could figure it out. We can work out a deal. We can solve the problem. I didn't love this, to be sure, but this was the response. If third party isn't working well, okay, we'll go back to first party. Another thing that I think is worth pointing out to you about this is when these lawsuits were brought, because of the dynamic of first party and third party and the like, it mainly was a PR fight. And I want to tell you a little bit how the PR fight played out. First, why do I say it's mainly a PR fight? The recording industry didn't bring these lawsuits hoping to make money. The college students don't have money to pay for the harm they caused. 1 hour of lawyers' time was way more than they were going to get from these college kids regardless. And so the idea of suing wasn't to make money case by case, but to get the word out. We know what you're doing. We know you downloaded Madonna Tuesday night at 8 p.m. in your dorm room. What were you thinking? It was to get the word out. It was to set the stage for a bigger conversation of, if you like our artists, why don't you buy the music legitimately? Come use what have turned out to be a wonderful legal market. Back then it was buying songs on iTunes and buying songs on Amazon. Now it's Pandora and it's Spotify and it's Amazon Music. But this was PR. We know what you're doing. It's not right. If you like these artists, come support them. Stop. It was a PR campaign. And law often is that. I'm always reminded of how the IRS plays in like February and March each year. By strategy, the Department of Justice brings cases in February and March against like a prominent businessman, an athlete, an actor, a politician, and they do it to get in the front page of the paper as a PR move to warn you and me that yes, there is enforcement, yes, it's awful, pay your taxes. For the music industry, these cases were a PR move, and the lawyers in the beginning really understood that. So they file a bunch of cases, and immediately they then go to the college kid and say, $25, say you're sorry, and we're done. And almost everybody takes the deal. $25, I'm really sorry, mission accomplished. A handful of kids don't, and they litigate all the way. And one of them was the guy that this website is all about. His name was Joel Tenenbaum, and I don't know why they drew him like a green turtle, but okay. His name was Joel Tenenbaum, and he got a bunch of folks from Harvard Law School, a Harvard professor, a bunch of Harvard students, to represent him, and he decided to fight. And it was awful. He was awful. In the litigation, he blamed his infringing activity on everybody but himself. He said that maybe someone drove by his house and logged into his Wi-Fi remotely. He said maybe it was his brother, his kid brother. I mean, who throws their brother under the bus? Come on. He did all these things. Ultimately, on the witness stand, he had to concede that it was him who did it. It was his music, in part because the lawyers got a bunch of his friends to testify as to who his favorite artists are. And guess what? That was what was uploaded and downloaded through his account. He fights it all the way to a jury verdict, and the jury reacts very negatively to Joel Tenenbaum, comes back with hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. Again, this is a PR fight. The idea in bringing these cases was just to influence the public. It wasn't to ruin this kid's life. So great, you get to the moment, the jury comes back, giant burden on Joel, and I was involved at this point. There's a call with all the lawyers and a conversation of what now? And the lawyers propose offering to settle. And they propose offering to settle, whatever it was, $1,000 and you can go home, Joel. And I was really strongly opposed. And I was strongly opposed because I didn't want to offer to settle. I wanted to throw the case out. And note the difference there. When you offer to settle, you give the power back to Joel, which is what they ended up doing. They offered to settle. And wouldn't you know, Joel Tenenbaum said no, and he finished the litigation. He then ended with this giant financial burden around his neck. He'll never clear it. You can't get rid of this in bankruptcy. He'll never make enough money to pay this debt. He said no. What we should have done, what I wanted to do, what I'm sure was the right thing to do, we should have just gone to the court after winning in front of the jury and said, we're dropping the case. And indeed, that very same day, we should have had one of the senior people in the music industry write an op-ed and say the New York Times, saying this morning, I told my legal team to drop the case against Joel Tenenbaum. And think of the themes they could have hit. They could have said, we did this because this was never about ruining the kid's life. We did this original lawsuit because we wanted to let people know that this is wrong. You should stop this. Come buy music legitimately. But we never intended to ruin this kid, to hurt this kid. And if he's not smart enough to walk away, we'll do it for him. Again, if the whole thing was about PR, I think they missed this PR move. This was the big PR win. It was handed to them. Take the high road one last time. Get your message out about this bad use of technology. Like, don't do this. They could have had a big PR win, and they kind of didn't. They won at jury, but I don't think that was the goal of the fight. But again, in our flow, I want you to see this is another ramification. If third-party liability isn't working well, we put more pressure on first-party liability instead. All right, that takes us through these ideas. Again, it's not just third-party liability. I want to make sure I emphasize that one more time. In entity like YouTube, Facebook, they might have exposure as third parties, helping you and me do wrong things on their platforms, but they also have exposure under 106. They reproduce, they distribute, and so on. And so a lot of these deals, the law under 512C, a lot of this is about both third party and this related activity where it's not technically third party, but it is still deriving from their interactions with users.